All right, for this section of the Healthcare Executive Marketing course, we're going to be taking a look at tracking results. And as I've mentioned in different places, what's important here is looking at the 30,000 foot strategic vision, directional view. We will take a look at some more nitty gritty granular tracking once we get to the individual channel strategies. But for this particular training, I just want to focus on the high level overview so we understand important things like what's possible, what can our teams track, what is our MarTech stack, what basic technology and software should we be using to have tracking in place to make valid and accurate decisions, what are the core KPIs that we should be looking at, and then maybe a brief glance at some of the leading indicators that other members on our team should be looking at. But as we get into this, I just want us to have a firm grasp of what's possible, and as we look at that, we realize it is actually kind of scary if you're not familiar with some of the tracking capabilities that are out there today. We can see people's IP addresses. We can see what they're doing on the visits to our website. We can get names of phone calls. We can record those phone calls. There's a lot of data that comes into play when we're taking a look at all these tools. And it's important to remember, again, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not going to give legal advice, but we have to keep that liability in mind. So you should talk to your general counsel, you should talk to your compliance department, and just make sure, especially within healthcare, there are a lot of tracking issues. Now, from a basic standpoint, the easiest way to think about privacy and HIPAA compliance is you have to have a separation between PII, or personal information, and PHI, which is the personal health information, right? So personal health information, personal identification information, don't mix those two. Much easier said than done, but if you can keep the health separate from the identification, you don't have an issue from a HIPAA standpoint. So your marketing data is generally not violating HIPAA unless you're, for example, saving it somewhere and saving it as patient data. Or if you're having a conversation with someone and you talk to someone and say, oh, look, this is our patient data here. Now you've just violated HIPAA because there's a breach in terms of you sharing information with a non-covered entity, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, talk to your compliance departments on that. But what I want to start off with here is, first off, looking at what's possible. So getting into some of the back end analytics. And of course, most important for us as executives is generally conversion tracking. We want to know where are the qualified inquiries coming from. That could be a call, it can be a form fill, it can be a chat, it can be a walk-in. Obviously, walk-ins aren't trackable from an online data perspective, but we're going to take a look at what we can track. And then, of course, we want to understand how those convert and those turn into new patients. But really important, and I'll emphasize this a number of times, from a marketing perspective, we are focused on qualified inquiries. The job of marketing is to drive qualified inquiries, meaning people who can come into your program. Either they can afford it, they have the insurance, they have appropriate pain point, they have the appropriate desire, whatever it is. A qualified inquiry is defined in your organization. That's what marketing's job is. It is someone else's job to convert those to patients. So let's say that I call into an individual provider and then I have to get a scheduled appointment. And then after my appointment and my assessment, I may admit or start partaking of services. There's a lot of steps after the initial inquiry that are out of the hands of marketing. So we need to understand what a qualified inquiry is, meaning are they viable for our services? And then it's other teams' job to convert those inquiries. So you want to draw attention to that because that's often a strong point of confusion for a lot of executives. So here is an example of a call tracking software. And so this can actually track calls, online form fills, chats. You can see here it's tracking total inquiries over time. And those total inquiries are broken down by location. So I can split it up by location if I want. If I have different service lines at different locations, it's a nice way to see what our inquiry volume is per service line. And it gives me a read on exactly how we're doing over the year. So you can see that for this particular provider, they get about anywhere from 700 to 1,000 calls per location over a given time period, and 133,000 calls over the past 12 months or so. So it gives me a good sense to see, are we going up? Are we going down? Are there problems? And these particular locations are pretty flat, which is usually what we would expect if there's no major changes to market dynamics, if they're an established provider rather than a new provider, if they're not changing their marketing budgets, if you're not increasing or decreasing your marketing budget, you should see a pretty high level of stability for an organization that is not expanding, that's just trying to maintain and continue on along on the good clip it's been going on. So what else can we see in this kind of software? We can scroll down and we can get into real specifics, and we can see exactly where the call came from. Did it come from Google Ads? Did it come from Facebook? Did it come from the website? We can see the date and time. We can see how long that call was. We can see the caller. And we can also see, or we can actually listen to the call. So there is recording in most of these software if you turn that feature on. Again, liability issues there. We want to be careful. Some states allow recording without notice, some don't. It's always best practice to let people calling know if they're being recorded, both for liability purposes and just for customer service purposes. But I want to give you a little bit of a background on understanding how this tracking works. So we see there's a tracking number here. We can actually individually assign tracking numbers, and we can say, okay, every single billboard we have has a different tracking number, or every single ad campaign we have has a different tracking number. A lot of executives get a bit carried away with this kind of granular tracking. At the end of the day, we don't really care from a marketing perspective what particular campaigns are driving the most calls. We want to know in the aggregate where those calls are coming from and what's being effective. And so that might be surprising to hear. You may be like, well, obviously I want to know exactly what campaigns are going to be effective, but that's the wrong way to think about marketing. So let's take the example of our Google Ads campaigns. And so we've had clients request to put an individual tracking number on each keyword for different ads. And so that way we're going to identify which keywords are driving the most calls. Well, we already know that. That's already built into Google Ads, so we don't need separate tracking set up to do that. But it's a non-viable strategy. So if I have someone looking for, treatment for a cavity or ankle rehab, again, there's only so much call volume in a particular market for those key terms. So even if I see that particular key term is converting really well, it doesn't help us as a marketing agency to drive call volume for the provider, because we have to be into all these other keywords. We have to be testing other ads. We have to be testing other landing pages. Like, there's all these variables that go in against defined by your cap and your search volume. But more than that, most marketing is multi-channel. So I go to the example of purchasing a car. So I assume most people are like me when they're purchasing a car. They have a couple different cars in mind. You don't just see a car and like, oh, that's the one I want, and you go buy that. You're like, I'm looking at these 3 or 4 different models. Now, what happens during that customer journey? I've seen some ads. That's how I became aware of that particular car in the first place, most likely. Or I've seen it on the street, or I have friends and family that drive it. Actually, if you look at the data on cars, people that live next to someone that have a car tend to buy similar cars. There's a pretty significant correlation between the number of neighbors you have that have a certain brand or type of car and you buying that car, not surprisingly, right? So that's an interesting point from a marketing standpoint. So in my particular journey buying a car last year, I saw some TV ads for it. Then I started to do research online. So I checked out what they had on their website. I went to other review sites that were talking about the car. Then, of course, it tagged me from a retargeting standpoint. So I started to see advertisements for this car come across my Facebook profile, come across my X profile. Then I went for a test drive. And then after I did a test drive, I did some more search and read some more reviews online. And so at that point, I came across some Google ads, and I came across some more of their pages that were ranking on the website. Eventually ended up buying the car. But you see how long that journey was. There were multiple touch points, some of it engaging with advertising from that particular company. and some of it engaging with word of mouth and people that I knew in my community, whether that was the salesman selling the car or friends and family or people that were also into cars and had a perspective on it. Our marketing's always the same. It's very rare that we have just a single channel driving new inquiries and patients. And if that's the case, that's probably a problem to us as an organization in terms of growth and scale. If we're overly dependent on a single channel, eventually that channel is going to tap out. There's only so much volume there. And also it's a massive risk. If we have other competitors coming to the marketplace and we have this channel with a fixed volume on it, and now we have 4 people competing on this one channel, that makes it really, really difficult to survive as a provider. There's lots of volatility on single channels for a plethora of reasons. And so by having a multi-channel strategy, we want to think through, again, the psychology of our users. What is their customer journey? What does the patient journey look like? What does the referral journey look like? All of these things are incredibly important because I want to think when I'm becoming aware of a product, I'm in a very different mindset. I have different questions in my head than when I'm comparing and contrasting the 3 or 4 vehicles that I'm looking at. That's also very different from making my final purchase decision. Each of these stages of the journey, each of the channels I'm using to reach individuals and families and referral partners on those channels is going to have a different strategy behind it, but there's multiple touch points. On average, you're seeing 7 to 12 touch points on a channel over a period of time. And that's critical as well when we think about, I can't throw 7 ads at someone in a single day to rush them through a decision-making process. That generally doesn't work. Instead, I get ad fatigue, I get ad blindness, I get burnout. You have to understand what your frequency rate should be to drive effective behaviors. So all of these things go into your channel strategies. Again, no one's going to call off a television campaign. When was the last time you saw a television ad and went and bought something immediately after or made a call immediately after? When have you seen a Facebook ad and immediately stopped what you were doing and went and bought whatever that thing is? It's pretty rare, most of the time, especially for higher cost products. Again, we go back to that linear relationship between the cost, whether that's monetary or effort or time, and the amount of trust that we need to build with an individual. So normally, the higher the investment or the higher the risk for the consumer or the patient, the more trust we need to build, which usually means more time and more ads across more channels. So just thinking about all that as you understand what your analytics are, and the point being that you're not going to see billboard calls in here. You're not going to see Facebook calls in here. You're not going to see television calls in here. You will from time to time, right? A very small number will be direct calls off of those channels. But the vast majority of people are going to see a TV ad, do other stuff for a while, then eventually come back and find you through your website. Same thing with a Facebook campaign or a billboard campaign or an ad campaign. They're not coming directly off those channels, and so you can't see them. And so we don't want to get fixated on final attribution, the last channel that they called off of, because it doesn't really give us the full picture. Other things that we can do in here, there's a whole bunch of filters you can go through. You can look at your sources. Again, which channels are they coming from, particular campaigns or keywords? Do I want to see which of my landing pages are working the best? Do I want to see which of my call center reps are doing the best jobs at converting or who they're talking to? Do I want to see how they're scoring it, which is something that we'll mention a little bit later. Conversion type. Are they a first-time caller? That's a really useful data point to get. A lot of these calls that are coming in are repeat calls. They're coming in from maybe it's staff, maybe it's referral sources, maybe it's new patients, or maybe it's existing patients looking to reschedule an appointment. So first-time callers are a good metric to look at. Lots of different options to have within this software. So then we can then go and look at reports and get a better idea of like per channel what's happening. Gives us a nice little breakdown here. How many are coming from Google My Business versus Google Ads versus Google Organic. Again, you're not seeing Facebook or billboards in here because you don't see people calling off those channels by and large. We can switch up the attribution strategy up here. So we can go from a first touch to a last touch to a W-shaped. W-shaped tries to capture your main journey, right? 30% gets attributed to first touch, 30% into mid touch, and then 30% into the final touch. Lots of different ways to run that. We don't need to get too much into that. just because it's very dependent on the healthcare organization, the provider type you are. So that's our tracking software in terms of conversion tracking. Now, I mentioned form fills. I just want to take a look at this really quick because I think it's important. If you're using something like Typeform, which is a great form fill, you can set things up so you can see what people are actually clicking through in the form. So let's say I've got a 5-question form. This kind of software can tell me how many people completed the entire form, all 5 questions, versus how many people completed only the first 2. And that gives us really good data and insight into, maybe the second question is off-putting to people. Maybe you asked for the social security number and no one's willing to give you that. I've seen that before. So in those situations, it's a data point that gives you a good red flag. Now, as a CEO, are you going to be that granular into the reporting? Absolutely not. That is what your team's for, your agency's for. But at the end of the day, just know that capability is there for us to be able to analyze the results. Going deeper still, we can get again more granular here. Here is an example of recordings and software recordings. So you can see here, we can see where people are coming from. We get the IP address again. So that's not going to give us a specific information on who it is, but it's giving us information on where they're coming from. So that's useful most of the time. Dates, times, how long they were on the site, what page they came from when they came from the site. So let's take a look at this one. We can hit play. This one was for 4 minutes and 19 seconds. We can also see over here on the right that they hit a total of 3 pages, and it tells us what 3 pages they went to. So we start to get a sense of the user journey on the website with it. So we hit play and we can see exactly what this person was looking at on our website, how they were engaging with it. And it gives us a lot of information. Where are they stopping? What are they paying the most attention to? Where are they stopping and leaving? If we go through a bunch of these, so there's a lot of qualitative analysis that we can get around a screen recording. And this is one of those ones I mentioned, which you probably don't realize. Literally every single website that you visit or that I visit has the potential to do this. They can track our IP address and look at exactly what we're looking at. Kind of scary, but also incredibly powerful when we want to do a qualitative analysis on where people are getting stuck, what's working, what's not working. So those are screen recordings, which is definitely a software that you should have or your marketing team should have. And then you can also do what's called heat mapping and scroll mapping, and the same software will usually do both. So this one, for example, here I'm looking at clicks, and so I can switch it between mobile and desktop if I want to and get a sense of both, because those are going to be different user behaviors. But we can see where people are clicking on this particular site. Not surprisingly, we can see that most people are clicking on the call button, large percentage of them. But important here that I want to show for this particular training is if we hit the scroll search, this will give us a percentage of people that stayed on the site before they left. Now, not surprisingly, 99% of visitors hit this point. We only hit a 1% not hit it for whatever reason. But just scrolling down past the first top of the screen, we've already lost 25% of our visitors, which is super normal. You'll see that across the vast majority of sites. Now scroll down a little bit more. We go past this call button here and we start getting into locations. We're already at 50%. I mean, we've scrolled down for like 3-4 seconds, not even, and we've already lost 50% of our visitors. So this is why it's critical that your initial, what we call the hero image, where the individual lands, it's compelling, it tells them where they are they in the right place, and it speaks to the unique differentiators of the organization, because for almost 50% of your visitors, like that's the main shot that you're going to get. You also notice that there are click to call buttons right away on that initial shot, and that's one of the first things they see scrolling down, because we know that we're going to lose over 50% of our visitors after that scroll. So we want to give them the opportunity to call, and that can also be a good sign, right? That they're calling right away, so they don't need to scroll down and see more information. There's different ways to interpret that data. Again, data starts to tell us a story, but it doesn't tell us the whole story. But again, very powerful tool here in terms of what we're able to do and what we're able to see. This can help us work on the website and say, okay, we're losing everyone after the hero image. Our hero image must not be very good. So what do we need to do to improve that? Or is there a way for us to get people to go from 75% upon scroll to 90% upon scroll? And there's lots of things you can do from a conversion rate optimization standpoint there. So great tools. Another one I want to look at is our paid media campaigns. So whether you're running Facebook or X or TikTok or LinkedIn, all these channels are pretty similar on the back end. They have very similar metrics that you can look at. And so just quick overview here. Again, this is not stuff that you should be getting the nitty gritty on, but what we want to have is a general sense of what's possible and what we could get data on if we really needed to. It's also helpful to sometimes ask our marketing teams these questions. But we can see here our average cost per 1,000 impressions. So how much are we paying to reach 1,000 people? That's a really important metric. I want to know what my cost is to reach a particular audience. Look at how many people are clicking on links for these particular campaigns. Now you'll notice over here, then kind of scrolling to the right, we have a cost per click, and we have a CTR or a link click-through rate. And these vary widely. Some of them are 0.05%, incredibly small. Some of them are up to 1%. So for a lot of campaigns in Facebook or an X or a LinkedIn campaign, like a 1% click-through rate is really good, which is important to think about. 99% of the people that view your ads won't engage with them. Now, just because they're not engaging doesn't mean you're not having efficacy. It's really important to realize that most of your advertising doesn't have immediate action that's happening because of it. Instead of what's usually happening is they're becoming familiar with your organization, they're starting to think about your organization, and they'll come back and engage with it maybe at a different point in time. But the type of campaign will change that too. So we can run an awareness campaign, which is designed just to reach as many people for as cheaply as possible. Or we could run what's called a traffic campaign, where we utilize the algorithm on the back end of these platforms to get in front of people that are more likely to click and engage. Those are different strategies. Sometimes I really want people to get to our content and engage with it. Sometimes I just want people to see the content. It's going to depend on how we're thinking about that customer journey. Also, type of media we're using. So if we're running a video campaign, people aren't going to click on a link after watching a video. They are going to watch the video, right? And so we need to be thinking about these parts of the strategy as well. You can get more data on here in terms of, did they click on just the ad, which is your click all rate, or did they actually click on a link that went to your website? That can give us insight into, are the ads engaging? Is it compelling? Do they want to learn more about the ad itself or engage with the video? Or are they more interested in getting to the site? But again, this data can be confusing. I always come back to that point. Like, the data only starts to tell a story. Let's say a lot of agencies and a lot of organizations will just run like a 2-sentence ad with a graphic. Well, I don't need to click on that because I got the entire piece of information right there in front of me. Whereas sometimes you'll run a longer, what's called long form content, where they have to click to see more. So that's going to have a higher engagement rate because people have to click to see the entire ad. So just because we see a click all rate being low versus other ads doesn't necessarily tell us whether it's engaging or not engaging. We can also see video engagement performance on most of these backend platforms. And so we can see what percentage of the video people are watching. Did they get all the way through it? Usually not. Most people don't watch the full videos. Was it cost for us to get a full playthrough? And the same thing happens with platforms like YouTube. So go over here. Here's a video that we created doing an overall analysis of investment in the addiction treatment market. And we can see here how long people watch this video. We can see that the vast majority of them don't finish it, right? We only had a 4% full completion rate, but this is an 1.5 hour long video. It's a long time. A lot of people aren't going to commit that time, or they scroll through it and the software is not able to necessarily record that super well. Versus here's a short little 3-minute video. And for this one, we've got almost a 70% completion rate because a lot of people are willing to engage and watch, a 2-3 minute clip. Also, it depends on what's happening in those videos. If we see a massive drop off where suddenly here at 1 minute and 20 seconds, everyone drops off, that lets us know that something we did in that video probably turned people off, because most people don't leave, but it could be because it was boring or it wasn't interesting or whatever the situation is. But bottom line that I want to look at with all of these different pieces is just the incredible value that we can get from these different channels and how much data we have at our fingertips if we want it. Now, going back to the CEO perspective, again, we don't want to get too much in the nitty gritty. What do we need to understand to do our jobs effectively and hold our teams accountable and get them to perform at the highest level? There's a basic tech stack that has to be in place. Your first level of that tech stack is your communication software. So this would be something like RingCentral, Dialpad, Vonage. These are kind of like, it's like your VoIP system. So they're going to track the calls coming in. They're going to track missed calls. They can potentially record calls sometimes. But this is just your baseline answering software is what you want to think of it as. It's not providing you marketing analytics. It's not providing you call tracking data. It's just really, was the phone answered? How long were people on the phone for? Who's answering the call? Do we have missed calls? Do we have voicemails? That kind of thing. Now, after that, and layered on top of that, what you should have is conversion tracking software. So that call rail software that we just looked at is an example of one that allows us to see, did they come from Google Ads? Did they come from our website? Was it off of a Google My Business profile? Was it off of a billboard tracking number? So that is the software that allows us to assign tracking numbers, allows us to create dynamic number pools for online campaigns. So that could be call rail, call fire, call tracking metrics. But again, that's a second layer that everyone should absolutely have to have a better understanding. It's still surprising to me just how many healthcare organizations that we go into that don't have any call tracking set up whatsoever. Well, how do you know how many calls you're getting? How do you know how many are qualified? How do you know where they're coming from? How do you know what channels are effective for you? Like, you need call tracking software. It's really, really important. Of course, everyone should have some kind of customer relationship management software or CRM. So this is both for individual outreach teams as well as for front office desk individuals or call center staff, because they should be able to input in who's calling, why they're calling, and then if you're sophisticated enough, that will all get transferred into like a reporting analytics dashboard. But when you look at something like your RingCentrals or your call rails, they're not necessarily going to have the detailed notes that you would want in a customer relationship management software or something that other people are able to access across the organization and provide reporting details. So those examples are Salesforce, HubSpot, Zoho are some pretty popular ones that a lot of individuals use and that we often recommend. And then finally, you want your dashboard reporting. So maybe that's Power BI. Obviously, Salesforce has Tableau. You can build a lot of dashboards within Salesforce proper. QuickSight, which is an Amazon software. QuickSight, which is an Amazon software. There's lots of different options out there, but these are the four basics that any provider should have to get some kind of basic level of tracking in place for making sure that whatever they're doing is effective, and so that you can drill down and get an understanding of what's not working. A lot of providers that I talk to will say things like, well, our census is low. What does that mean, right? Why is your census low? It could be because you're having a lot of AMAs. You're having people not complete their treatment. You're not getting referrals. It could be because you have staff that are not very compassionate, and so they're turning people away. It could be your wait times are too long. It could be that the call center or the front desk person is terrible at converting the qualified inquiries that come in. It could be that your marketing's not good, that you're marketing on the wrong channels, or that you're ineffectively marketing. It could be that you have changed your cost structure, and we had a 10% increase in overall advertising costs year over year, but we didn't adjust our budgets to match that. And so now we're seeing a 10% drop in our total inquiries, which led to a 10% drop in total admissions. You have to troubleshoot, and so this software and this data stack gives you the tools to do that. The next thing we're going to look at is marketing dashboard KPIs. So this one is obviously critical for us as executives, making sure that we're tracking the right things. But where a lot of, in my experience, CEOs get lost is they start to get into the weeds way too much. And obviously there's a challenge to being dangerous but not knowing enough. If I know a little bit about the legal system and process, I probably don't want to represent my organization in court just because I know a little about what I'm talking about. Could land us in a lot of hot water and end up with some pretty high costs there. So same thing from the CEO perspective. Unless we have a marketing background, we really shouldn't be getting into the weeds on the marketing. We should be building teams or hiring outsourced vendors and agencies that are able to provide us the guidance that we need. So these two metrics are what every single CEO should be requiring from their teams. Total qualified inquiries, and that qualified is really important, and then the cost per qualified inquiry. Now I said total. You'll notice that what I didn't say was qualified inquiry per channel. And this goes back to what we were talking about before. You are not going to have a qualified inquiry from your Facebook campaigns. You're not going to have a qualified inquiry from your television campaigns or your radio campaigns. You do not get that data because they are a different part of the marketing funnel and the customer patient journey. So from what I want from a CMO or from an agency partner that we're working with is I want total qualified inquiries and what the cost was. Now, I should be able to go to my agency or my CMO and say, we don't have enough inquiries. How do we get more? And that's a very complex question. It's not, hey, we should just spend more money on Google ads because we can see a click, we can see a call, we can see a new patient or a schedule or whatever a particular metric is. We need to be thinking, well, what are those 7 to 12 touch points I need? Do we need Facebook and X campaigns running? How does the patient engage on those platforms and what stage of the journey are they in on them? What's going on with their SEO and what content don't we have that maybe we need for things that people are searching for? Once they land on our website, are we converting them right on that website? Or do we only have a 1% conversion rate on what do we consider to be a money page or a important bottom of funnel service page? Or should we be able to get that up to 5%? Where do we need to focus our time to get more inquiries in? And there's as many answers to that as there are organizations. Our data and your CMO or your agency partner should be able to tell you what's going to move the needle, but we're often going to want to leave it up to them, right? We're not going to get into those weeds. We have other things to be focusing on. Same thing for cost per qualified inquiry. I want totals. Am I really going to obsess about my Google Ads CPA? Potentially, right? What's my cost per new admission on Google Ads? That's helpful for me to know potentially as a CEO, but really that's my CMO's job. All I care about is total new patient volume, total admissions. However they get those is their job. And so if I need them to reduce that cost, it could be that they need to optimize their Google Ads campaigns better, but more likely they need to drive calls and inquiries from other channels. So oftentimes search engine optimization is one of the cheapest channels once it's up and running and once it's going really well. So our average cost per inquiry across a lot of different provider types is around $10 per inquiry. That is a phenomenal cost per inquiry. But now that often took 12 to 24 months to build up enough content and optimize the websites to such a point that they were able to drive that many inquiries, because you have to rank across a large range of terms. You have to get a lot of different conversion rate optimizations in place on the different pages that you're ranking. It's not a quick process, and indexing on Google takes time. Your average authority of your websites and the backlinks that you have are dependent on the breadth of the content and the quality of the content that you have. All these factors go into play. So what we can't do is just say, hey, well, we should be doing more SEO because that is a cheaper cost per inquiry. Well, yes, that's right most of the time. So that is something we should be investing in, that it's going to drive down our cost per qualified inquiry. But at the end of the day, it's not going to be a snap of the fingers. And again, I'm thinking of it as part of the process. That's part of our strategy, but what are we doing to drive Facebook inquiries? How are we thinking about how X fits into the patient journey and then gets people to search online for us or gets people to our Google Ads campaigns? These are the important points that we have to think of from a psychology, a tactics, and a strategy point. Last point here is, you notice that none of this says new patients or admissions. Again, your marketing is not your sales department. They're not your admissions department. Marketing's job is to get qualified inquiries. And so if we're going to get more people in the door, I need to line up as many inquiries as possible, and then the team has to convert those. Now, we do mention qualified because if we're driving a bunch of inquiry volume that's not the appropriate patient for our particular provider, then marketing's not doing its job. Then they're not being effective. So if we have a provider that only takes commercial insurance and doesn't take Medicaid, then more Medicaid calls is not going to help. We need more qualified inquiries. However, different channels have different mixes. So on average, if you're looking at different provider types, about 90% of call volume is going to be Medicaid. I don't care what service line you're in. 90% of Google ad call volume tends to be Medicaid. However, coming off of SEO or your organic Google searches, only about 75% of total inquiries are Medicaid. So different channels have different income demographics, different search profiles, different patient profiles. And so that all factors in, but we need to be thinking about that. So it's not always bad though, right? It becomes a matter of cost effectiveness. If I can get 10 inquiries and only 1 in 10 are a qualified inquiry, but I can do that cost effectively, that's fine. If I can't do it cost effectively, then it's a problem. But focus on your inquiries, focus on your qualified inquiries. Now, the CMO should be able to understand it per channel. CMO should really know what Google Ads is driving versus search engine optimization versus the boots on the ground outreach team, how your Facebook, your billboard, your TV are supporting and helping out with the patient journey to drive those bottom of funnel channels. They're the individuals that should be getting into the nitty gritty. And they're going to have tons of leading indicators for that. It could be how many people are scheduling an appointment. It could be the page conversion rate, how many website visitors turn into an inquiry per page, right? Because it's not just website as an aggregate. That's not overly helpful. The people that are looking at the Charlie Sheen blog, because he just had a recent procedure and that's really interesting to people, is not going to drive inquiries into your program, but it's going to drive your traffic way up, right? So there's going to be a 0% conversion rate on that page. Whereas if you go to your service line page for the actual services that you are offering, that should have a good conversion rate. So we want to track that as a leading indicator. We have to be smart. We have to be strategic in terms of how we're thinking about that. What is our click-through rate? Does it matter? As we talked about when we looked at those Facebook campaigns, an awareness campaign is different from a traffic campaign, is different from a video campaign. They contribute in different ways. And so one of them I might expect a 1% click-through rate, or another one I might only expect a 0.1% click-through rate. But if my cost makes sense in terms of how I'm fitting that strategically into the patient journey, then that's the appropriate strategy for us to be taking. Your CMO should understand what the leading indicators are per channel. Now, again, later on in this course, we'll talk about some of those channels more in depth. So you have a sense of at least, does your CMO know what they're talking about? Are they looking at the right things? But that's their job at the end of the day. Also for a COO, or maybe it's like the head of admissions or head of patient care, or lots of different names for it. But they should be the ones that are looking at the total number of new patients coming in, and then especially that qualified inquiry to new patient rate. So your CMO is driving the qualified inquiries. Your COO is tracking how many of those convert to admissions. So as a CEO, I want both numbers, but I'm getting those numbers from different people because they're different parts of the funnel process. So some of the things that keep under consideration as you're looking at your marketing, a lot of things can impact it. Again, it's not a linear relationship a lot of the time. So the marketing department could drive a significant number of qualified inquiries, but there's no scheduling availability. You were booked out for a month, or scheduling is complex and the scheduling availability you have doesn't meet the needs of the patients in the community. Whatever the situation is, that can have a big impact on the conversion rates that are not related to how good the front desk or call center is, or not related to how good the marketing campaigns are. So we want to think through some of those pieces when we're looking at just the raw numbers. The tenure of the team often has a big impact. We've seen this significantly in our data across a lot of providers. If you've got an individual outreach person that helps you build presence, awareness, and relationships in the community, usually that person has anywhere from a 10 to a 30% increase in efficacy in their own ability year over year that they've been with a specific provider. And notice this as specific provider. What we don't see is someone that has a lot of experience in the industry and then hopping around from different providers within the same service type. What we see is someone staying with an individual provider, building relationships in conjunction with that specific employer, and then that 10 to 30% increase in qualified referrals and new patients coming in from the work that they're doing. So tenure of the team is really important. Obviously, you see that with call center teams and stuff like that too. Online review scores is critical to all of this. So we see really clearly in our data that once a provider drops under 4 stars for especially like a commercially insured or a private pay facility, they're going to stop getting calls. Lots of people do research. Even when you're running a Google Ads campaign, if someone's in crisis, a lot of people are still taking a moment to check the review scores before they make a final call to a provider. If your scores are under 4, you're going to see at least a 10 to a 20% drop in the number of inquiries you're getting in, and your cost per inquiry is going to increase by 10 to 20% at least on average too. So online review scores are critical. Now, not every provider, like if you're serving the Medicaid population, they tend to have lower review scores, or if it's a crisis care, a lot of people coming to crisis care are not super happy to be coming in care in the first place. So they're more likely to leave a bad review. In those situations, it becomes comparative. How does your review score compare to your competitors in the marketplace? And if it's significantly lower, that's going to have an impact. If everyone's at a 2.5, then 2.5 is going to be okay. It's not the end of the world. Not that you don't want a better score, but it is a comparative analysis. Missed call rates is obviously critical too. We see this a lot of times with providers. We push a lot of inquiries in, and then people aren't answering the phone. Well, what do you do when someone doesn't answer the phone? Like if you're trying to call a dentist, you want to get in for someone to do a filling, and someone doesn't answer the phone, you hang up, you call someone else. So it doesn't matter if that dental provider calls you back, you've already scheduled an appointment somewhere else. And so your missed call rate is really critical to what's coming in. And all of this data is helpful and important to look at, especially when I think about it from our perspective. We often get calls from our clients and they'll say, oh, you know what? Census is down. What's going on? And so the first thing that they'll always do is they'll check with their admissions team or their call centers or their front office staff. And invariably the answer is, well, we're not getting enough calls, or the calls aren't good quality. Happens all the time. You go back to the data and you find out that the call volume is actually the same as it's always been, as is the qualified inquiry volume. That's not it. So maybe conversion rates dropping, maybe you had a lot of people leave the program early, maybe you're not having the same repeat business that you've had, whatever the situation is. But the gut feeling that a lot of people have is to blame something else. And it's very easy for admissions teams in particular to blame the marketing department. Absolutely might be the marketing department's fault or your marketing agency's fault. That does happen, but your data and knowing your data allows you to actually look at it and say, well, actually, no, call rates are fine. Oh, you're saying that the quality of the call is down. Well, here it's clear that it's actually the same as it has been the past 4 months. So that's also, not the problem here. But it looks like Jenny's conversion rate has plummeted, or we had John leave when we brought Patrick in, and now Patrick's conversion rate is half of what John's was. Those are the kind of things that you want to be looking at. And then time to inquiry response. If someone sends an online inquiry, for example, you better get back to that person within 15 minutes or less if you really want to have a good chance of connecting with and converting that person. Online inquiries for chats, like if you don't have someone available immediately, it's almost a waste of time, because that person's not going to stay on the website. They're not going to wait for a response, and they're actually just going to get annoyed and frustrated if you don't. So if you don't have the right time to inquiry, then again, it's the same, just like missing a call. If you're not set up to appropriately answer the inquiries coming in, you're going to have a less than ideal outcome. Now, call center tagging is something that's really important to keep under consideration. So we saw when we looked at that call tracking software that they had tags that are available on there. And so what you should do is you should have tagging for what matters to you. Maybe you want to track men versus women callers. Maybe you want to track Medicaid versus commercial insurance versus private pay. Maybe you want to track a referral partner versus a direct consumer call. Maybe you want to track family members versus individuals calling for themselves. Whatever is important to your organization, that's what you want to be tagging within the system. The number one thing that everyone should be tagging is qualified inquiry. You should be defining what a qualified inquiry is for your team. So maybe that means needs your particular services and has the insurance types that you're looking for. Maybe that for you counts as a qualified inquiry. If we don't have that data, then we can't send that back to the marketing department to say this is working or this isn't working. Like, you need that data to know if you're efficacious or not. And then we'll wrap things up with some of the wrong questions to ask and some of the right questions to ask. So a wrong question. How many new patients did channel X generate? I hope I've driven that home in this training and other trainings. Channels don't generate patients directly. There are bottom of funnel channels. So your bottom of funnel is potentially your referral outreach into the community. That should be bottom of funnel. If I'm building a hospital partnership relationship, I should see direct referrals coming in from that partnership. So that's a KPI that my outreach rep should have. Google Ads and to some extent search engine optimization. When people are going online and searching for treatment near me, services near me, whatever service you're providing, they should be converting on a regular basis because they want services right now. And so if they're not converting, something's wrong with your ads, something's wrong with your landing pages, or something's wrong with the way that the team is handling that inquiry. Other channels cannot produce that information. Facebook, TV, X, billboards, radio campaigns, the brochures that you provide your business development reps, the white papers you provide your business development reps. Right? These things are not going to have a direct KPI in terms of new patient admissions. There's no way to track it. They are different parts of the patient customer journey. And so they need different KPIs. Those are your engagement KPIs. Those are your inquiry KPIs in terms of downline. When we add on a Facebook campaign, do we see an uptick in the total number of inquiries coming in? That's what we want. We want total lift across the system. And again, when we go back to the CEO expectations, total qualified inquiries and total cost per inquiry. Is the needle moving in a positive direction on both those things? If the answer is yes, great. Marketing's doing a good job. But what we're not going to do is say, well, marketing, I didn't see any calls or admissions get tied to the Facebook channel, so we need to cut that. I can't tell you how many of clients that we've had that shoot themselves in the foot and kill their ability to build a long-term brand and a reputation in their communities and connect with these partners or these patients across multiple channels because they didn't see a direct ROI per channel. It doesn't work that way. And so what inevitably happens is you shut off that channel, and it doesn't happen immediately, but 3 months from now, suddenly census is down. And everyone starts scrambling. They're like, well, why is census down? Well, because you just turned off all of your display campaigns that were a massive part of the top of the funnel that was driving people through a decision-making process, getting people familiar with you so that they did start calling from your website and your Google Ads campaigns, right? If I see a Google ad, I've got 4 Google ads I'm looking at, and one of those is from a provider that I've seen 4 or 5 Facebook ads from before, I'm much more likely to click the Google ad of the provider I'm familiar with. Maybe I've even clicked on some of the links from that provider. Maybe I've watched a video of a testimonial from that provider, or a video of one of the doctors or the healthcare staff or the psychiatrists or the counselors that work for that provider. I'm like, oh yeah, I know that provider. I forgot about them, wasn't thinking about them, but that's right, they're good. I'll click on them. Well, that is driving your inquiry volume. And again, we've seen this in the data. Like if we run Facebook campaigns with Google ad campaigns, we'll often see a 10 to a 20% increase in total inquiry and qualified inquiry volume versus if we're just running one channel, because all of these channels work together to support each other. So what you absolutely never want to do is say, give me a per channel admissions report or a per channel qualified inquiry report, because it's going to lead you down the wrong path. This goes back to our entire focus on strategy when data only can tell you part of a story. Where can we find new patients in the next 1 to 30 days? This one comes up constantly. There is really nothing that you can do that's going to have a silver bullet or a magic button that turns patients on tomorrow. And there's a couple of reasons for this. Like one, if it was that simple, then everyone would be building billion-dollar businesses left and right, because all you had to do was figure out the right marketing tactic and then you get new patients in and everything was hunky-dory. That's not reality. Part of it is because, as we've always said, marketing is a dependent variable. So a lot of it has to do with the reputation of you as a provider and the awareness that you have in the community. The word of mouth referrals that come in as you grow and build your reputation eventually drives of what we often call the invisible ROI. If I've got 50 advocates in the community that are talking to all these other people, that has this potentially exponential effect of referral ripples and people inquiring about the program. Whereas if I've only got 5 or 10 people that are advocates in the community, I can't track that advocacy. I don't know what people are talking about in their homes, behind closed doors, at the staff party, on lunch breaks, but it is a significant driver of your overall volume. And that's the needle you can't move in 1 to 30 days. So you can always come back to pay Google a bunch of money and try and get more calls that way. And if you have not hit your community cap, if you haven't tapped out that search volume, there's always potential, high cost volume potential there. But that's it. What you really need to be thinking about is how are we going to drive volume 3 months from now? How are we going to drive volume 6 months from now? And that's not a Google Ads campaign, because Google Ads has no long tail. You're not building a reputation in the community. Google Ads only works when people are in crisis and searching for a provider where they don't know where to go. If they don't know where to go, they're going to go to Google. But if you've done a really good job, they already know to go to you, and they don't even have to search Google for a provider or for services. They've seen you, or maybe they've seen your competitors, and they know where they're going to go, so they don't have to do a Google search. So the right questions to ask are, how many qualified inquiries did we get across all channels? Right? I want to know all channels, and that's all that matters, especially from the CEO perspective. Is the business profitable? Is it working? And we're going to have different tiers, right? Like a Google Ads admission might cost us, it might be a margin of only 10% on those admissions, where we find out that investing in our business development channel, we're getting a 50% margin on those, or our SEO channel, we're getting a 70% margin on those. But they all have limits. My outreach rep can only talk to so many people. There's only so much search volume organically. There's only so much search volume of people that are willing to click on ads. And so to grow a program, we need all of those channels working, but they're all going to be operating at different conversion rates, different customer acquisition costs. I want to know that overall we're profitable. That's the bottom line. So how many qualified inquiries do we get across channels? How are different channels contributing to this number? Now, my CMO or my marketing team should be able to answer that, at least from a directionality standpoint. So no, I can't get calls off of Facebook or calls off of billboard and track that very clearly, but I should be able to tell you how strategically those channels are contributing to the numbers that matter to us. What's our targeting strategy? Who are we trying to reach and why? How much are we paying to reach those people? I want to make sure that my CMO or my marketing agency or marketing department is thinking about their audience. What are their pain points? How do they think? What platforms do they use? Where do they live? All these things are really important. So our targeting strategy is a super smart question to be asking our teams. And then following from that, what are we doing to ensure steady or increasing volume within the next 3 months? Because again, 1 to 30 days is often a terrible question to ask. It gets people on this short-term hamster wheel of like, oh my God, we're panicking. What do we do? Where can we throw money? It's not realistic. The vast majority of businesses don't grow in 30-day windows. Marketing doesn't work on a 30-day window for the vast majority of your channel strategy. You can sometimes throw money at Google Ads. It's not a long-term strategy because there's no long tail. People in crisis are looking at that moment in time. They didn't know where else to go, so they Google searched you. But you've now spent a whole bunch of money, got some patients in the door for a high cost, but have not built a community reputation, have not built community mindshare, have not built relationships with referral partners, which is what a good marketing strategy is going to do. So the right question to always ask is, what are we doing today and what are we working towards so that 3 months, 6 months, 9 months from now, we have increased volume, we have less volatility, and we're going to be more successful? That's the right question to be asking. Last one is, how can we lower our average cost per inquiry? Great question to ask. We're allocating capital all over the place. Can we see places where we could allocate it better? Are there channels we should be on? Can we improve our messaging? Can we improve our conversion rate optimization on our landing pages? Can we improve the conversion rates of the ad campaigns that we're currently running? Is there something we could do to support our business development team so that they can bring more people in at the same labor cost? All of these are really smart, intelligent questions that a good agency partner or CMO and marketing department should be able to answer. So hopefully that was a good overview for you to understand tracking and think about it from a strategic standpoint. What do you need in place? What questions do you have to be asking? And what capabilities do we have to give us the data to make those decisions that help us make the strategic plan that's going to work for our organization?